John Calipari is regarded as one of the greatest coaches of the 2010s for his work at the University of Kentucky. But as of the past 5 years, this narrative is beginning to change. While continuing to grab star-studded recruiting classes, as well as finishing in the top 3 of the SEC, the seasons continue to end in disappointment come March Madness. And with the SEC beginning to become more competitive, it seems that this time of dominance in the SEC and the tournament is coming to a close. So today I'm going to be going over every single season since Coach Calipari took over. So sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and enjoy. And welcome to How to Ruin a Legacy, John Calipari. So, as it turns out, 86% of my viewers aren't subscribed, so if you're watching, please subscribe. It would help me out a lot. I'm on a road to 1,000 subscribers. This is a long one, so enjoy. Prior to John Calipari being appointed head coach at Kentucky, the school was going through a little bit of a dry spell. For a school with 7 national championships and 13 Final Four appearances before Calipari was appointed, failing to make the Sweet 16 and an NIT appearance was basically unacceptable. So, John Calipari, fresh off a fantastic tenure at Memphis with 2 Elite 8 appearances and a runner-up finish, got right to work at his new school. After losing 9 players the year before, prior from either transferring, the NBA draft, or just graduation, he signed the #1 recruiting class in the entire country, with the likes of John Wall, Eric Bledsoe, Daniel Orton, and DeMarcus Cousins. Preseason expectations were high coming into the season. Most publications had the Wildcats ranked in the top 5, some even ranked high as number 2, and were listed as #1 in SEC preseason rankings. John Wall was seen as a future NBA Hall of Famer before he even started at college, with the rest of these top recruits also coming into the program. Fans expected this team to do better than the year before, but I don't think anybody expected this level of success. This team finished 35-3, winning the SEC regular season and conference tournament. John Wall won National Player of the Year, SEC Player of the Year, and earned first SEC and All-American team honors. DeMarcus Cousins was named SEC Freshman of the Year, which, quite frankly, I don't get if John Wall was also a freshman and won SEC Player of the Year, but my point stands. And he also received SEC First Team honors and Second Team All-American honors. Calipari won SEC Coach of the Year, and this team reached the Elite 8 before falling in the hands of 6 seed West Virginia. Expectations were high coming off an Elite 8 appearance and a fantastic year before. However, there was going to be a lot of roster turnover. 5 players entered the NBA draft from the 2009-2010 team, 4 of which went in the first 18 picks. So what does Calipari do? He goes out and gets the #1 recruiting class for a second straight year, which featured 3 5-stars, all ranked in the top 10. Brandon Knight was going to try to fill in for John Wall's incredible freshman year, and Enes Kanter was basically a swap for DeMarcus Cousins. Obviously not a 1-for-1 trade, but still extremely talented, replacing extremely talented. The regular season didn't go as expected or nearly as well as the year prior. They finished 22-8 going into the SEC tournament, finished second in the regular season, but won the SEC tournament with ease. They beat the top team in the conference, Florida, by 16 in the championship game. This was just starting to become too easy for Calipari. He had 2 SEC championships in 2 years. Oh boy, there's way more to come. They finished with a Final Four appearance in the NCAA tournament, losing to eventual champion UConn, led by March Madness superstar Kemba Walker. Success just kept coming for Coach Calipari, but there was still room for improvement. Coming off a Final Four appearance the year before, obviously expectations were going to be high. Only 3 players were leaving the program, 2 going into the draft, and only 1 was from that #1 recruiting class in 2010. Calipari recruited the #1 class for the 3rd straight year, including #1 rated player in the class, 6'10" power forward Anthony Davis. As was becoming normal to Kentucky fans, expectations were extremely high once again. They began the season ranked #2, climbing as high as #1 and as low as #3. Their one loss during the regular season was to Indiana at Indiana. It seemed like a fluke, but Kentucky didn't win their conference tournament, but did win the regular season title and were ranked #1 going into March Madness. They coasted on their road to the Final Four by beating every team by double digits, even getting revenge on their sole regular season loss to Indiana. They would meet in-state rival Louisville in the Final Four, as well as Coach Calipari's personal rival, Rick Pitino. Anthony Davis shined, having 18 points and 14 rebounds, followed by 5 blocks. And Kentucky won 69-61, en route to their first national championship appearance since winning it all in 1998. All that would be standing in their way was Bill Self and the Kansas Jayhawks, another blue blood like Kentucky. This was Anthony Davis' worst scoring game of the season, going 1 of 10 from the field and had 6 points. but led the Wildcats in every other statistical category, finishing with 16 rebounds, 5 assists, 6 blocks, and 3 steals. And Kentucky would finish as national champions. It took Calipari 3 years at Kentucky to get them back to the top of the college basketball world. Anthony Davis would win pretty much every possible award you could think of. Player of the Year, SEC Player of the Year, National Defensive Player of the Year. The list just goes on and on and on. He would end up going number 1 in the draft come summertime. Kentucky was coming off the high of winning a national championship, so there were of course going to be high expectations. They had the number 1 recruiting class once again, led by the number 1 player once again. Nerlens Noel was a similar player to Anthony Davis on the defensive end of the floor and was taller, but I don't believe anybody would expect the drop-off they ended up having in the 2012-2013 season. Nerlens Noel would get hurt by February, derailing their chances at competing for a national championship. They would lose their first game of the SEC tournament and in the first round of the NIT, finishing the season 21-12, and was their first disappointing season under Calipari that showed the first signs of weakness, his inability to adjust. While losing a player like Nerlens Noel hurts a team quite a bit, their roster still had the talent to compete, but Calipari wanted to play the exact same way as if Nerlens Noel hadn't gotten hurt, and put someone else into that role, hoping they would step up while they were not the same player, with a different set of strengths and weaknesses. But this could just be written off as a fluke season riddled by injuries, with this level of disappointment mixed with the level of success seen the previous 3 years under Calipari. The only way to really move seemed up. Calipari had managed to recruit the number 1 recruiting class for the 5th straight season, getting 4 players in the top 10, and another was ranked 11th. Calipari managed to get basically his own Fab Five, with Julius Randle, the Harrison twins, Andrew and Aaron, James Young, and Dakari Johnson. Kentucky managed to get off to a rough start, losing 9 games heading into the SEC tournament. Even with their struggles and a 12-6 conference record, they still finished 2nd in the SEC. The only competition that they had the entire year was Florida, another program with a lot of success over the past 10 years. They managed to make it to the SEC championship, only to lose by a single point to Florida. So, no SEC glory for a 2nd straight year. However, they would still make the NCAA tournament as an 8 seed. But they weren't any ordinary 8 seed. This team had finally gotten experience at the college level and were ready to have some fun. Every single tournament game they played in was decided by single digits. However, besides their first round matchup against Kansas State, every single game would be against a seed higher than them. They beat 2 seed Wichita State in the round of 32, 4 seed Louisville, coached by Rick Pitino again, and 2 seed Michigan in the Elite Eight. Their next matchup in the Final Four was someone who would end up becoming a thorn to Kentucky in the future: Wisconsin, led by Frank Kaminsky. They would squeak out a 1-point win to move to their 2nd national championship appearance under Coach Calipari, against a familiar foe: 7 seed UConn, led by another March Madness standout, Shabazz Napier. They would end up falling once again to the Huskies en route to their respective schools' 4th national championship. Julius Randle and James Young would end up declaring for the draft in the summer, but for the most part, most of the Kentucky squad was running it back for another year. This season was the first year that Coach Calipari did not recruit a number 1 class, probably in part to the amount of players that were staying from the year before, but still managed to have the number 2 rated recruiting class. They had Karl Anthony Towns, Trey Lyles, Tyler Ulis, Devin Booker. This team was stacked. They would start the season preseason number 1 and would never lose this ranking for all of the regular season. Led by the Harrison twins, Willie Cauley-Stein, Karl Anthony Towns, and Devin Booker being a great 6th man off the bench, this team's expectation was national champion or bust. They would finish the regular season 31-0, winning the SEC tournament with ease and earning the number 1 overall seed heading into March Madness. Their run to the Final Four was also relatively easy as well, even winning their Sweet 16 matchup by 39 points. 39 points in a first-round matchup as a 1 seed makes sense, but a Sweet 16 matchup, that's unheard of. I say with relative ease due to their Elite Eight matchup against ACC champion Notre Dame, only winning that game by 2. This sets up a Final Four matchup with, can you guess, Wisconsin, led by Frank Kaminsky. Kentucky was looking to finish as the first undefeated national champion since Bob Knight's Indiana in 1976, but the issue was they had to get there first, and I think they already thought they were there. Led by Frank Kaminsky's 20 points and 11 rebounds, Wisconsin upset the Wildcats, and Big Blue Nation was left wondering what went wrong. The Harrison twins and Karl Anthony Towns combined for 64% of the team's points in that game, and they were the only ones who scored in double figures. But yet again, this team did not reach the sky-high expectations they had coming into the season. With 7 players leaving for the NBA, there was a lot of roster turnover. But Calipari does what Calipari does best: recruit. He brings in the number 1 recruiting class for the 6th time and the number 1 player in that class, Skal Labissiere, as well as athletic 5-star guard Jamal Murray. They started the season with sky-high expectations, ranked number 2, and after a week climbed to number 1. But this season was not easy, to say the least. The Wildcats experienced their fair share of losses during the season, and while they didn't drop out of the top 25, it had its fair share of rough patches. Going into the SEC tournament, they finished tied for the first in the conference with Texas A&M at 13-5 in conference play and 23-8 overall. Their first 2 games of the SEC tournament were easy: a 26-point win versus Alabama and a 13-point win versus Georgia. The championship game was that versus which team they were tied with, Texas A&M, and it was not an easy matchup, and it ended up going into overtime. With Skal Labissiere in foul trouble, 30 points from Tyler Ulis was enough to do the job, and they squeaked by for their 4th SEC Conference Championship under Coach Calipari. They were given a 4 seed in March Madness and a first-round matchup versus the town from Once Upon a Time, the school Stony Brook, and it went as you would expect: a 28-point win that set up a second-round matchup versus Indiana. The guards Murray and Ulis once again dominated and combined for 44 points in this game, but was not enough to continue their national championship hopes for the season, as it ended at the hands of Yogi Ferrell and the Hoosiers. Another season ending in disappointment. With 3 players leaving for the NBA, Calipari recruited the second-best class in the nation, led by 4 5-stars: De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Bam Adebayo, and Wenyen Gabriel. They started with a preseason ranking of number 2, reaching number 1 after 2 weeks. They did have their dry spell, dropping from number 4 to number 15 in just 4 games, where they won just 1, but still went into the SEC tournament after being the regular season champions. They won the conference tournament with relative ease for the 5th time under Coach Calipari and went into the tournament as a 2 seed. They squeaked by 15 seed Northern Kentucky, led by 19 points from De'Aaron Fox and 18 rebounds from Bam Adebayo. They then proceeded to beat 10 seed Wichita State in the round of 32 with a much worse offensive performance. The Sweet 16 matchup was set. It was UCLA, a team that had beat them in the regular season, led by star boy Lonzo Ball, versus the Wildcats. This was probably the game of the year. Fox scored 39, and Malik Monk had 21, and 4 UCLA players combined for 57 in an 86-75 game for a trip to the Elite Eight. This Elite Eight appearance was their 6th under Coach Calipari. They would fall to eventual champion UNC in the next round. Not a bad year by any means, but not enough for the expectations of Big Blue Nation. The season had its typical start for Kentucky. 5 players leaving for the NBA, second-ranked recruiting class with 5 5-stars, led by Hamidou Diallo and Kevin Knox, and a 4-star named Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and a top 5 preseason ranking. However, this season felt different from the very beginning. They had several close games against opponents they should be blowing out. A 4-point win versus Vermont, an 8-point win versus Troy, a 9-point win versus Harvard, a 7-point win versus Virginia Tech. And yes, I get it. A win is a win, and wins don't come easy. But to a team of Kentucky stature, they should be winning these games. Once SEC play kicked off, things kind of went into a downward spiral for Kentucky standards. They lost 3 of their first 7, as well as having a 4-game losing streak in the middle of the conference play. The SEC had finally started to catch up to the powerhouse that had run it since Calipari took over. They would have their worst finish at 4th in the regular season, but would still end up winning the conference championship. So no one thought to bat an eye at the issue this team had. Young talent alone wasn't going to win them the conference every single year. Come NCAA tournament time, they squeaked past Davidson in the 5-12 matchup, rolled past 13-seed Buffalo, and then lost to 9-seed Kansas State in the most wild region in March Madness history, as it had the first 1-seed to ever lose to a 16-seed, and was represented by 11-seed Loyola Chicago in the Final Four. In a region with that many upsets, it truly should have been an easy ride to the Final Four, but with a lack of tournament experience by the players, success would not come this season. God, I just feel like a broken record at this point. Same start to the season, 5 players leaving the draft, number 2 recruiting class in the country, and a preseason ranking of number 2. But would Calipari finally break through again? The answer was still no, except the difference was that Kentucky and Calipari didn't win the SEC tournament. They didn't make the championship, nor win the regular season title. They finished 15-3 in conference play, a record which would usually win it outright, and finished tied for 2nd. The conference was now officially not who's going to beat Kentucky, but actually who's going to win the SEC. Heading into the NCAA tournament as a 2 seed, they rolled through Abilene Christian by 35, then Wofford by 6, Houston by 4. They reached their 7th Elite 8 appearance under Coach Calipari to face SEC opponent Auburn, a team that had only beaten Kentucky twice since 2000, let alone since Calipari took over. But they fell in overtime to yet again not reach the Final Four. The season, once again, was seen as a disappointment. At the end of the season, Calipari would end up signing a 10-year extension for $86 million, keeping him in Lexington until 2029. It seems as if Calipari truly does have a type. 3 players leave in the draft, number 2 rated recruiting class led by Tyrese Maxey, and number 2 preseason ranking, which climbed to number 1 after 2 games. They did dominate the SEC yet again, winning the conference regular season title, but would not be given the chance to fight for the SEC tournament title, as COVID-19 would cancel all of college basketball's postseason. But this season would re-win the hopes of some of the Big Blue Nation fans who had been disappointed, and set expectations somewhat high yet again for the next season, if it would happen. With 6 players leaving in the draft, 1 player transferring to UCLA, and only 2 5-stars coming in, even though it was the number 2 recruiting class, set expectations down a notch to begin the season, as they started at number 10. But that would end up being the high for the season. Kentucky started 1-6 with home losses to Richmond and Notre Dame, as well as a neutral site game loss to Georgia Tech. SEC play would end up providing some wins, but Kentucky had its worst season in school history, finishing 9-16. And with a second-round exit in the SEC tournament, fans were at Calipari's head, and opposing fans couldn't help but laugh at the abysmal play from the Wildcats. Another funny note, that transfer that went to UCLA, Johnny Juzang, he led UCLA to a Final Four appearance. That's more than Calipari's had in the past 4 or 5 years, and at this point. Post-editing Judition here, I didn't realize that I didn't include the death of Terrence Clark in between the 2020-2021 and 21-22 seasons. Rest in peace to him. He was going to have a really successful NBA career going forward. So, yeah, thoughts and prayers to his family. Now, with the emergence of the transfer portal, even more players left in the offseason. 4 players left for the draft, 2 left in the portal. However, Calipari still managed to get the number 2 recruiting class with 3 5-stars, and a random transfer center named Oscar Tshiebwe. Kentucky had similar preseason expectations from the year before, ranked number 10. They were middle of the pack in terms of the top 25 for most of the season, until they hit a stride near the end of the season. They would climb all the way to number 4 in the nation, as it seemed Coach Calipari was back. They finished 3rd in the SEC, led by transfer and eventual Naismith Player of the Year, Oscar Tshiebwe. However, they would be left without another SEC championship at the hands of Tennessee in the semifinals. Come tournament time, they were ranked as a 2 seed and would play St. Peter's, and would end up playing their second round. Oh, wait.
Makes the move towards the rim. Tshiebwe looking to pass it off. Jumper, Grady, off the back of the iron. Edwards got it, and he's fouled by Mintz.
They would fall to 15 seed St. Peter's in the first round, as Coach Cal was outcoached and have another disappointing finish to the season. To say the fans were disappointed would be an understatement, but as they have the past few seasons, they would trust Cal for another year. During the offseason, reigning Player of the Year Oscar Tshiebwe decided he would stay for another year to run it back and hopefully have a successful season come March. Calipari would have his lowest rated recruiting class coming in at 6th, as well as having 2 players leaving for the draft and 4 leaving in the portal. They would start the season at number 4 in the preseason rankings with high hopes yet again. They would start their season 7-2 with losses to Michigan State in the Champions Classic and number 2 Gonzaga. However, there were glaring flaws with this team. While Oscar Tshiebwe continues to have dominant performances, if the rest of the team struggled in any capacity, they were screwed. And there was almost 0 bench production and had to heavily rely on starters for scoring. They would manage to finish 3rd in a superpowered SEC, but would lose their first conference tournament game to Vanderbilt and get awarded a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. They would beat a weak Providence team to play Kansas State. This Kansas State game showed the true flaw of Coach Calipari. All-American level player for Kansas State, Marquise Noel, had 27 points and 9 assists, and when asked questions in the press conference, he gave Keontae Johnson his flowers by actually referring to him somewhat, referred to him by his last name, but only referred to Noel as,
and the little kid makes a 3.
Showing a lack of scouting and preparation going into this game, expecting to just win it. This game would end their season, and rightfully so, have Kentucky fans upset at Coach Calipari. So, what went wrong? I like to attribute it to his lack of adjusting with the times. A lot of Calipari's reputation at Kentucky is attributed to his success early on at the school. In his first 6 seasons, he had already been to 4 Final Fours and 2 national championships, winning one of them. In the 8 seasons since, he has not been back to the Final Four, and has only been to the Elite Eight twice. Now, for most schools, this could be written as a success, but at the level Calipari brought Kentucky to, as well as the recruiting classes he has continued to bring in, success is expected. Some of the fans I've talked to have said, I'll ride with Calipari for this season, but it's Final Four or bust. And for Calipari to do that, he'll have to adjust to the times. Kentucky basketball already has a lot of possibilities with NIL money due to the success of the program and the names they have brought in, as well as talent they have put out into the NBA. And now teams can't win on young talent alone like Calipari expects to do every single year, like he did at the beginning of his tenure. As of the last 7 national champions, they don't have a lot of young talent and have done the old is gold method. Of the 35 players that have started and won a national championship, only 2 have been true freshmen. Jalen Brunson, who is an all-star level player for the Knicks, and Kihei Clark, who is currently still at Virginia. With the transfer portal becoming more prevalent than ever, it's possible to get extremely talented players with experience, and has been shown with Oscar Tshiebwe being dominant and being acquired in the portal. But for now, only time will tell. Thank you so much for watching and sticking through all of this. I really appreciate it. This took a lot of hours of work, so please subscribe for more sports content or content similar to this. If you want similar stuff like this, please like the video and let me know other stuff you would like to see. I'll see you next time. Adios.